All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today for today's Local First webinar, where we'll be talking about how to stack IRA, ITC, and utility incentives to help your small business. My name is Victoria, and I am People First Economy's Community Engagement Manager. Today, we are thrilled to welcome presenter Kyle Reith of Catalyst Partners. A little bit of background on Catalyst Partners. For the last 20 years, they've been assembling a team of trusted industry leaders who share a common passion to create positive environmental impact one project at a time. Founded on the principles of integrated project delivery, they act as the catalyst to help their clients establish their objectives and achieve them via their various sustainability consulting, healthy building consulting, building performance, and green building certification services. They've delivered over 500 projects and have provided building performance and consulting services for over 39 million square feet of projects locally, nationally, and internationally. But they bring something more than just volume. They bring a sincere interest in listening to their clients and tailoring their approach to the precise needs of each and every project. So this informative webinar will highlight the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, the Investment Tax Credit, ITC, and utility incentives aimed at fostering energy efficiency and clean energy. These incentives, including the updated 179D deduction and 45L energy efficient home credit, offer significant tax credits for energy saving renovations and new construction projects. For small businesses, these incentives present a valuable opportunity to reduce operational costs, enhance sustainability, and invest in energy efficient solutions that improve long-term profitability. Kyle is going to dive deeper into how combining these credits and incentives leads to all of those really positive things and competitive in the market. So yeah, we're super excited to be hosting this conversation, and I will pass the floor over to Kyle.
All right, thank you. Let me get my screen shared. Okay, so we'll be looking at how to stack IRA, ITC, and utility incentives to help your small business. And a couple of those things might just seem like acronyms, but hopefully at the end here, you'll have a better idea of what those all represent. To start off, I'm Kyle Reith with Catalyst Partners. I'm our Director of Building Performance and also a commissioning provider. And within our building performance team, we provide consulting services for all sorts of projects, high performance, and even just code compliance projects. And as a company, we provide certification services, certification review, and consulting services of many types. So to start off today, I wanted to first go through a couple takeaways that I'd like you all to be focused on trying to understand. When it comes to the incentives and tax credits that are available, there's no one pathway for every project to follow, which is why they're kind of difficult to capture them all efficiently. But once you have a well-defined project, you can look at all the opportunities, and if planning early and looking at your project holistically, you can make a smart pathway to achieving the most benefit from those incentives and credits to optimize your ROI by not having additional consulting services or things like that that you don't really need, or missing opportunities for services that may be available for free from utilities. So the first thing we'll look at is utility programs. And these would be consulting services or assessments or even retrofit opportunities that are provided by utilities of any kind. So each utility has different programs, which is why, again, it's kind of difficult to have one path for everyone to take. Some utilities may have prescriptive opportunities, some may have other programs like audits, retro commissioning, find and fix programs. Those ones are great for identifying what your project opportunities are, understanding what some of the benefits could be, and helping to define what that return on investment potential is, so you can have some metrics to make decisions based on, especially when trying to figure out, do we replace this equipment now or later, or what's the best path? Having some financial data to look at is very helpful. And some of these utility providers can offer those up for free. So first step is definitely worth looking at who your utility providers are, what programs do they have, and can they help me define what my project should be through a free program. And sometimes that's provided direct through the utility or through some of their partners. If you have specific systems as well, let's say you have compressed air in your facility and you know there's leaks, but you don't know exactly what the first steps are, you can work with a partner to your utility provider. They can do assessments of your system and provide recommendations for remediation efforts, and those can be incentivized by the utility provider. So that way you will not only address the energy consumption issue, but then also get incentives back in your pocket. I think a couple of key things here is that there are typically businesses. These can include heightened rates at which they incentivize certain opportunities as compared to their typical prescriptive incentive book. So their small businesses specifically may have better opportunities, and they may also have opportunities where they would come in and do an installation for you. For instance, for lighting, they might have a higher incentive rate and also come in and swap out your lighting for you to help get those improvements installed. So this should definitely be your first step, especially if you have a project in mind that you want to get better data on, or if you aren't sure what you need to do, but your bills are high and you know something has to happen. This is a great place to get started. The next part of the utility side is utility incentives. And these are also a little difficult to define because of all the different providers. So this map here shows Michigan. If you're a gas and electric utility consumer, you may have one utility provider and you may have two. And you have to look at who is providing for your site to understand what incentive opportunities are available. So these maps here just kind of give you a layout of what this looks like. The left is electric utility providers. Consumers Energy is largely on over half of the Lower Peninsula is through consumers, and then DTE is over on the east side of the state primarily. But there are also smaller utility providers all throughout. And then natural gas is a little bit more broken up, not only by the providers, but then also the ability to have contracted gas delivery and purchasing. So it can be a little difficult, but if you look at your utility bills, you should be able to define who those players are and then start going down the line of seeing what opportunities they offer. So for utility incentives, these are really simple. They are typically prescriptive, and if you do this, you get this back. They can apply to new construction and equipment replacements, but then they can also apply to things like equipment tune-ups too. So things that you might routinely do, you can get incentives for. And then these would largely apply to renovations and tenant build-outs as well. As far as what qualifies, they have a range of systems and devices that can qualify. And again, it does depend on your provider, but most of them have lighting and HVAC, and then others go in through more detailed things like controls and domestic water systems and compressed air and process systems and things like that. Some also have incentives for LEED certification. So if you get LEED certified and you have an energy model, you can send them the results and they will provide an incentive check back based on those energy and gas savings. The important thing here is that these incentives come back to the owner as a direct check that gets sent out, which is really nice when you look at trying to capture other incentives, maybe federal incentives or other state opportunities. Not all of them can happen right away, but the utility incentives are a good way to get money in your pocket to start, and then start having a budget to work from to say, okay, well, let's take some of that incentive money that we got back, and maybe we have to do some modeling or something to claim other tax credits. So now we have a budget to work with where we can get those tax credits and start to compound some of those incentives. And that's kind of what we're here for today, to try to talk about not just the obvious utility incentives, but using those funds in the budget, how can you maximize your total return? We have a couple examples here, just to kind of put something out there to get an idea of how this would work. So it's obviously very different for every project, and you have to look at what your project entails to know how this might apply. But in an example with a commercial property, that's 100,000 square feet, and it's designed to meet or to exceed energy code by 10%, let's say. A typical utility incentive amount to expect would be about $48,000. And that would be from all the different systems going into that project, and being able to bundle them all up into one incentive application. If you were to use a consultant to collect all that documentation, work with your utility providers, and submit it all to the point where you're receiving a check in hand, it would be on the order of a 10% fee. That's typically what we would charge as a fee that's that would be paid out after the funds are received, so no upfront cost. But you can also do it yourself. There's no reason to utilize a consultant. The forms are all available on the utility providers' websites, and you can fill them out, provide the required documentation, submit them, and work through the process on your own if you'd like as well. A second example is a market rate multifamily residential project. This one has, as an example, 200 units, similar energy performance as the last one, so exceeding code by 10%. And we chose that because it's pretty easy. If you were to prescriptively meet the code requirements, but utilizing LED lights and maybe a couple little features of the building here and there, it's quite simple to exceed the energy code by 10%. So that's why we chose that. And that would likely qualify you for 179D, which we'll talk about later. So in a multifamily case, there are different prescriptive incentives available. And so for this example, you could expect somewhere on the order of $41,000. And, again, a consultant fee of 10%, or you could go through the process yourself and save those costs. So as far as a project like this goes, this would get money in your pocket, a budget you can work with to then look at other opportunities that we'll go through next. The next topic we'll go through is the investment tax credits. These have been updated since the IRA has been passed, the Inflation Reduction Act. And a couple things that we want to highlight are Section 48 and 48E, and then also the depreciation components. So we'll start with Section 48. This is what most people are familiar with. When they hear about renewable energy tax credits, this is the one that most people are talking about. It was being phased out, and it was intended to be phased out completely by 2024. But it has been extended when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed till 2032. So it has gone back to the 30% federal tax deduction or tax credit, and it applies now to more systems. I have a list of systems on the left here, and all of those would apply, but the definition has been made very vague or very ambiguous to where anything that can be qualified as renewable energy can count. So you can be creative. If you have unique sources of renewable energy on site, they can all be claimed under this credit now, versus before where it had some fairly specific items that it applied to. A couple that I'll mention here that are noteworthy is the PV, so solar panels, electric solar panels that everyone I think would probably associate with this, of course. But then also solar thermal. We see those every once in a while on projects, and they're a neat use of solar energy, and they do also apply under this tax credit. And also geothermal. Geothermal is something that we're going to see more and more of as people try to electrify and decarbonize their buildings. And the biggest issue with geothermal is cost. So the fact that it can apply this 30% tax credit is a big improvement. And also looking at the adders can significantly increase that 30%. So the adders, the way they work, and this would apply to all systems, there are multiple adders that are typically 10 to 20%. There's a 10% adder for utilizing domestic content on projects. There's a 10% adder for siting in an energy area, and I'll define that a little bit more later. And then there's a 10 and 20% adder for building in certain low-income areas. And most of these areas have been defined already. So if your project is within them, you qualify. And then the domestic content there's a certain percentage of the system's content that must be American made. And that changes year to year. It was 40%, it goes up to 45, 50, 55, and so on, up to a maximum, I believe in 2027, it maxes out. And so these can all add up. So if you were to maximize this, you could potentially have an additional 40% on top of 30. So you could have 70% coming back as a tax credit for installing solar or geothermal, which completely changes the return on investment calculation. If you're looking at a standard system and its operating costs throughout its lifespan, and comparing it to an equivalent system utilizing geothermal and its operating costs throughout its lifespan, it now makes sense. If you can claim 40, 50% in tax credits to offset those costs for a typical project, now it's at a near break-even point. And you have the added benefits of continual energy savings and for instance, for geothermal, that bore field can last up to 100 years, if not more. They have very long lifespans. So there are a lot of benefits here, and it's definitely worth looking at exactly which ones apply to your project and what your location can afford you to understand which of these make sense and which of these may not. The one thing to note is that for all renewable energy systems, if they can generate over 1 megawatt, which would be a very large system, you don't automatically get the 30%. You would be required to meet the prevailing wage and requirements and the labor standards to achieve a 5% multiplier. So that would bring you from 6% tax credit up to the 30%. So that's only for larger projects, but that is something to consider. When it comes to energy communities, they're a little bit difficult to define, but luckily there are tools to show you what they are and where they're located. So it's more so about knowing where your project is, placing it on a map, and seeing which categories it falls in. So here's a definition for it. I don't really want to go through it exactly, but in general, there is the metropolitan statistical area method or non-metropolitan statistical area. There's two different categories there that can qualify you. And then there's the census tract, which can also qualify you as one of these areas. And the easiest way to figure this out is just to look at a map. There are maps provided by some of the federal government websites that will show you which areas are which. So in the pink here, these are the MSA, non-MSA energy communities that would count for some of these adders, specifically a 10% adder, and potentially more depending on exactly how they're defined. Again, you'd have to dig in a little further to your exact location and seeing which requirements you meet or not to see which adders you can get. But it's a significant amount of Michigan. Basically, the upper half of the Lower Peninsula and all of the Upper Peninsula would qualify for some type of adder. And then there's additional ones in green shown. So if you're in a area that qualifies as pink and green, that may be 20 or 30% that you can get. Or if you're in just one shade, it may only be 10, or a lot of these are maybe 20. So this is a component of it that I think a lot of people miss. It's definitely worth looking at and understanding. Are you looking at a 30% tax credit available? What does that look like for an ROI? Or are you looking at more of a 50 or 60% tax credit? And how does that impact those calculations? And also the energy communities, if you just Google energy community map, this website will show up. I have a link here in the slides if those are made available, but otherwise just a quick search of that will bring it up for you. The last part of the investment tax credit that I'd like to cover today is the depreciation of assets. This is also a part of it that a lot of times is skipped over or maybe only focused on by the accountants, but it's good to be aware of. So there's two different components worth looking at. One is the bonus depreciation. This one is phasing out. So it was at 100% in 2022, and now it's at 60%. And 2026 is the last year that you can claim it at 20%. But what that allows you to do is claim additional depreciation than what you typically would be able to do for any energy improvement investment in your facility. So if you make an investment in upgraded equipment, HVAC, boilers, something like that, some type of improvement, you can add this bonus depreciation and help reduce your tax liability within those years that those projects are implemented. And the idea is to reduce the burden in the year that this work is being completed, to try to incentivize you to do it. The thing with bonus depreciation, though, is that it does need to be claimed in the year that it's filed. So that is one of the caveats there. If maybe you're a developer or someone who doesn't have a tax liability immediately, then better option would be to look at Section 79 depreciation or 179 depreciation. This one has flexible timing, and you can elect which years you want to claim it in, but you don't get the bonuses. So you can you can depreciate your equipment's value up front and have that credit on your taxes. And when you have a tax liability, you can apply it and reduce your liability in those years. So again, it's another opportunity to try to lessen the burden of making these upgrades that are trying to be incentivized. The next category here is related to the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. This went into effect January 1st, 2023, and it has two components that I want to talk about today. There are a lot of different buckets that got funding. There's a lot of different articles and outlets talking about the different amounts that are out there, and for different purposes. But for today, we're going to look at 179D, which relates to commercial building space for new construction or retrofits. And also we'll be looking at 45L for single family and multifamily residential. So starting with 179D, this is an opportunity to claim a tax deduction. So this is a deduction in taxable income or tax liability. And there's a couple different ways that it applies, but it's based on whole building energy performance. So we have some images here of energy models. You have to build an energy model of your building, and you have to show that after your improvements you're making, you are reducing the energy performance by 25 to 50%. So for an existing building, you can look at your baseline of your previous 12 months of energy use, and then build a model to show your reduction from there. If you're doing a major renovation or something of that sort, this would be an opportunity to do it, to claim that money through an energy model and using your previous energy bills. Anything that would be categorized by permit as new construction, like a major addition, would have to follow the new construction requirements. If you are able to meet the minimum requirement in 25%, and you are meeting the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, which is basically your state's prevailing wage book needs to be met, and 15% of the labor hours need to be from approved apprenticeship programs. If that's the case, then you would qualify for $2.50 per square foot. And if you exceed the energy performance by 50% or improve it in a retrofit scenario by 50%, it would go up to $5 a square foot. And again, that's a reduction in, so multiply that by your tax rate to see your total dollars in pocket. If you do not meet those requirements, you don't get the 5 times multiplier, which means that you'd be looking at 50 cents to $1 per square foot. If you were doing a new construction project or a major renovation that would need to meet the new construction requirements, then you would be looking at a baseline of ASHRAE 90.1 2007, and you would have to exceed it by the same percentages for the same benefit. I think one thing to note here is that in Michigan, our energy code currently is following ASHRAE 90.1 2013 and is potentially getting improved to ASHRAE 90.1 2019 in October, or at least that's what is expected. So what that means is that a code compliant building in Michigan already is on the road to hitting that 25%. We've done energy models for a code compliant warehouse, let's say, and those were 80% exceeding. So you get the maximum benefit, and mainly it's due to lighting and other things that are typically incorporated into projects nowadays. But compared to this older baseline, you do get a big boost in energy performance. If our energy code goes to 2019, it is likely that all code compliant projects would be at or near the minimum requirements to qualify for 179D, in which case it would be a matter of just running the model with a new baseline, documenting those performance metrics, and submitting the required documentation to claim the tax deduction. After 2026, starting January 1st, 2027, it's expected that the code baseline will change. We don't know what it will change to. It's anticipated ASHRAE 90.1 2019 would be the code, which would make it significantly harder to achieve this, but it is based on approved codes by the IRS, and currently that is only ASHRAE 90.1 2007. So if they adopt any codes between now and the end of 2026, that will be the code that'll be followed. So it may be 2013, it may be 2016, 2019. At this point, we don't know. And if they don't adopt any, then it will stay 2007. Something to be aware of. This table here just shows a general idea of what this looks like. So if you had an example project with 43% energy savings that was not meeting prevailing wage, you'd be at 86 cents a square foot. And if you were meeting prevailing wage, you'd be at $4.30 a square foot. And if you were at 100,000 square feet, that would be an $86,000 reduction in taxable tax liability, or up to $430,000 reduction in tax liability. So to look at what this cost benefit might look like, if you had, let's say, a 190,000 square foot building that has an energy cost savings of 40% over 90.1 2007, assuming you're not meeting prevailing wage or apprenticeship qualifications, then you'd be looking at 80 cents a square foot, be a $152,000 reduction in tax liability. And this could be applied, is intended to go to the owner, but it could be handed off to a design team or something like that. So if you're an owner who does not have a tax liability or don't intend to have one for the immediate future, you could also hand it off to your design team for a reduction in costs, or some other way of recouping some of the project costs. A typical consultant fee for doing the energy modeling, submitting documentation, getting the approval and sign-offs for the accountant to submit this would be on the order of $8,000 to $12,000. And a couple of rules of thumb that we put together here is that If you are not meeting prevailing wage, you'd probably want to be meeting the minimum requirements in over 100,000 square foot to consider doing 179D for a commercial project. If you were at 50% energy savings, then that would go down to about 50,000 square feet, just to make it worthwhile. And that means that over half of the benefit in real dollars comes back to the owner. We assume if most of it goes to the consultant to document, it might not be worth it. And if your project is meeting the prevailing wage requirements, then that goes down significantly. So anything that's meeting the minimum requirements and is 20,000 square foot would be worthwhile. Or if you're at the maximum benefit of 50% or greater savings, then even down to a 10,000 square foot project would be worth going for 179D. Just to get an idea of what these deliverables would look like, required scope of work to do 179D would be whole building energy model, developing a report on the findings from the energy model. There has to be a site visit conducted to confirm that everything in the model is what is installed on site. And then there has to be a signatory form provided to this tax preparer. So there has to be a PE that signs off and stamps a letter that certifies the results of the model. And that's just in case there's ever an audit. You have the documentation available. We're going to go through today is 45L. This specifically relates to single family and multifamily residential projects. 45L is energy efficient home credit that was provided with the Inflation Reduction Act. And for single family homes, they have different opportunities related to installing efficient windows, wall insulation, HVAC systems, utilizing heat pumps, things like that. And they have some home credits that are attractive. So if you're doing any work on single family homes or on your own home, it's definitely worth looking at what would apply as far as federal incentives, as well as your local utility incentives. And when it comes to single family homes, especially with your utility providers, those prescriptive incentives are very simple to apply for. You can go right on their website, find a form, submit it, they'll send you a check. And likewise, it's very simple to include these in your tax documentation at the end of the year if you were to go for any of the federal incentives as well. For today, we're going to focus more on the multifamily residential component of 45L to understand what that might look like to try to achieve some of these opportunities. So first, we'll start with the Energy Star certification. With multifamily projects, if you are not meeting prevailing wage, there's an opportunity for up to for $500 per unit as a tax credit. And if you are meeting prevailing wage, there's the 5 times multiplier, and you can get $2,500 per unit. In order to achieve this, you must meet the Energy Star multifamily new construction certification requirements, which would provide your building with a performance certification as well. So one way to look at this is just the dollar amounts that you can get for these tax credits. Another is you have a way of marketing your building as being energy efficient, and also you have tax credits that are available in relation to this work. So in order to achieve these, there are multiple requirements, but I think the one I'd like to touch on today that is important is that you have to follow the Energy Star guidelines. So there's different energy modeling requirements that can be followed for modeling units or modeling the whole building, or meeting prescriptive requirements if you don't want to do a model. And then there is field work and checklists have to be completed and submitted. And this is a process you'd want to think about up front. You'd want to plan ahead, register the project, get a consultant on board, a verifier that can be a partner for you to help you complete this certification and qualify you for these federal incentives or credits. Some of the requirements are listed out here on this page. You have to do some duct leakage testing as well. There is some functional testing to be completed in the building. And this would be something that would definitely have to be planned out ahead, and there are certain consulting services required for this Energy Star multifamily new construction certification that could be compounded with others used on the project to help reduce costs. And some of those might be field visits to verify systems. You could also use that in conjunction with 179D, which can also apply to multifamily projects, and do your verification of systems that would be in the energy model while also doing other work on site. And the energy model for Energy Star certification could also be used in alignment with an energy model for code compliance modeling or modeling for 179D as well. An example project for multifamily residential would be, for instance, 180,000 square foot building with 225 units that meets the Energy Star building certification requirements and exceeds the 179D baseline by 25%. So assuming this is your project, you're not meeting prevailing wage or apprenticeship requirements, you would get a tax credit of $112,500 through 45L at a consultant cost of around $10,000 to $20,000 to get the Energy Star certification completed. And then on top of that, you would also be able to claim 179D, and at the minimum of 50 cents a square foot, you would also have another $90,000 reduction in tax liability. And the rule of thumb for 45L that we've come up with is that if you have a unit or a project that has is not meeting the prevailing wage requirements, you would want to be above 100 units for it to really make sense, unless you're able to do some of the work in-house or you had other efficiencies you're able to leverage. And if you are meeting prevailing wage, that threshold comes down to 20 units. And again, that's to make sure that over half of the financial benefit goes back to the owner. If, let's say, Energy Star certification is something you'd like to have, then maybe a smaller project would make sense to go through this process, because you could do it at a cost neutral basis with the tax credits, instead of trying to have over half the benefit come back to you. I mean, maybe just having the certification is the benefit that you'd like to use for, say, marketing purposes. The scope of work for Energy Star multifamily new construction would look something like energy modeling that's being done per ASHRAE or per the HERS standards, pre-drywall verification that needs to be done on site by an RFI or a HERS rater, a final inspection and testing of units, HVAC functional testing of units, and then certifying the project with getting certificate stickers for each of the units, showing that they meet the performance requirements after doing the testing that's required. The second section of 45L I'd like to go through is if you were to meet the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home certification requirements. Now, this would qualify you for double the benefit, so $1,000 per unit without prevailing wage and $5,000 per unit with prevailing wage. The requirements are listed here. They are more stringent than Energy Star, which is why you have more of a benefit, but it also comes at more of an upfront cost in construction to meet the requirements. So those items are listed here. There are prescriptive and modeled pathways that you can take to achieve this certification. An example project using the same building as before, so 180,000 square feet and 225 units. You'd likely be at a 40% cost savings for 179D just due to the more stringent requirements of the DOE's or program. And assuming you're not meeting prevailing wage or apprenticeship requirements, you'd be looking at a $225,000 tax credit available at a consultant service cost of around $18,000 to $32,000, depending on the project. And then 179D would also be available, and you'd be able to claim $144,000 in reduced tax liability. And the rule of thumb for the DOE ZER is actually the same from what we've come up with. Again, 100 units without prevailing wage, 20 units with. And that's likely because of the added cost of consultant fees for the certification because of the more stringent requirements and the extra costs due to the measures that have to be taken to meet the requirements of DOE ZER. Again, if DOE ZER is a certification you find as a marketing opportunity or something you want to have for the project, a smaller project than these rule of thumb numbers would still make sense because you can do it at a significantly reduced cost. The deliverables or a scope of work likely for a DOE ZER project would be energy modeling, drywall, pre-drywall verification, final inspection and testing, so more stringent testing, HVAC functional testing, and then again, you'd finish up with getting certifications and stickers to represent those certifications for each unit. So that was a lot to go through, and I just wanted to sum it up with what do you do with all this information? We started off saying that there's no one direct pathway for any project. And so if you want to make energy improvements for your small business and you want to maximize your incentives available, you really need to start off identifying what your project is and thoroughly understanding that part. So I would say with where to start, you can start with audits, utility provided audits, retro commissioning services from your utility, or maybe your own form of project identification. But you have to start there. And from there, you can then look at which of these apply and which ones do you want to target to go for. So identifying your project scope is very important. Knowing everything you plan to touch will help you understand, does this fit my project or does it not? Identifying utility incentives and programs that you want to go for. Say you do have an audit opportunity available, or you do have prescriptive incentives available that you want to target. Make sure you're aware of those so your project can be prepared and planned for in a way that will achieve them. If there are federal incentive programs that match your project, if you feel you are going to meet the requirements for some of the ones we talked about today, make sure that's planned early on so you can target them. And then understanding your code compliance pathway. If you plan to use an energy model for code compliance, understand that that reduces your cost for meeting these program requirements because you can compound the utilize the model to achieve the requirements of, let's say, 179D, or you can use it to do Energy Star certification. And then when you're aligning services as well, if there's field work or certification programs, getting someone who can do all the work or someone who can use their service for multiple things is the best way to maximize your ROI and make these incentives worthwhile. All right, and with that, we have a list here. Catalyst Partners is someone, we do this type of work often. We're partners with many of the utility providers in Michigan, and we provide a lot of the services needed to achieve the things we talked about today. A couple of those are just listed here. If you ever are interested or looking for a partner to help navigate all these opportunities, we're happy to help out. And we can go on to questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kyle.
Yeah, thank you.
That was a lot of really valuable information, and I'm sure that folks are taking it in. So we'll give a couple minutes here if anybody has any questions that they would like to pop into the chat or into the little Q&A box. But yeah, thank you. We really appreciate it. And this will be distributed afterwards as well. So if folks need to rewatch any of this information and think on some questions later down the line, then we can provide those materials and ensure that they can get in contact with the crew over at Catalyst Partners.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Looks like we have one question. For a small business with limited additional capacity, can you dive deeper into the resources they could take advantage of?
Yeah, so I would start with looking at your utility provider and seeing what programs they have. They may have a a program where they can visit your building and do some inspections and reviews to understand what opportunities they can offer you. And of course, they would have the best knowledge of what is available in that moment, because it does change year to year and throughout the year. I'd also look and see if they have any find and fix programs. If you have a control system or something like that, they can come to site and do evaluations that are find and fix, that are meant to get low and no cost items addressed and claim those savings for their own purposes and to help you out. Other than that, if you have maybe a more more intense project, let's say, or you have higher energy consumption, or process energy consumption that's more significant, then looking at their retro commissioning or ASHRAE audit programs that they could pay for and get you a free audit that could define a pathway to saving energy and getting those financial metrics in front of you to make a good decision is also very helpful. And I mentioned early on too, if you have systems like you have leaking air, or if you have a process system that's just a huge energy hog, a lot of times they can do assessments of single systems too. So you could reach out to your utility provider or a trade partner of theirs and have them come out to do an assessment of that specific system to understand how you can optimize it.
Great. Thank you. And another question that we have, if I rent my space and there are materials and resources I can bring, are there materials and resources I can bring to my leasing company to encourage them to get started?
Yeah, I think, if you're renting the space, and especially if you have to pay the utility bills, I would think they would be open to understanding the opportunities. So I'd say if there's a program that applies to your space or your building, I would, through your utility provider, let's say you're with Consumers Energy and you look on their website and they have this program to do a low cost find and fix or something like that for their control system, you could bring that to them and say, hey, they have this program, it'd be no cost to you. They'll come out, they'll check out the controls, they'll optimize them. And they usually do that with a requirement of less than a 1-year ROI. So any building owner should be interested in doing that. It would make sense, I would think.
Great. Amazing. Well, we have a few more minutes, so if folks have any other questions that come up in this time, please feel free to drop them in the chat. But I will move into our closing announcements. While folks are thinking on any of those last minute pieces. So again, thank you all so much for joining us today. People First Economy is thrilled to be continuing these educational event styles and ensuring that we're able to provide the best resources that would benefit the businesses in our network. Coming up next, we have our next monthly coffee hour on Friday, October 11th from 9 to 10 a.m. And it'll be at Koozies Retail and Coffee Shop on the East Beltline. We would love if you came out to join us for this casual networking opportunity with great coffee and even better conversation. And another opportunity we like to plug, which we have been chatting about all this year, so you might have already heard about this, is People First Economy is part of a collaborative for supporting capital access for small businesses. Currently, we're partnering with technical assistance organizations across the state to support businesses interested in employee ownership. So if this sounds like your business, or if it sounds like a business that please contact a member of our team or visit peoplefirsteconomy.org/access to capital. And finally, like I said, we'll be following up with resources and a blog feature for this webinar that you and your team can reference in the future. And just want to give one last big thank you to Kyle and the team at Catalyst Partners for leading us through this impactful webinar. This is truly valuable information and will continue to provide value, not only in this virtual room, but beyond. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't look like we've had any other questions come through. So that concludes today's webinar. Thanks again. And yeah, keep an eye out for those blog recaps.